Let's begin. We will continue from the previous class where I had basically covered a bunch of MCQs pertaining to respiratory failure, and we had tried to keep it interactive where uh, you guys were basically answering the MCQs for us. Respiratory failure is not an extensive domain when it comes to EDIC. They will usually test your concepts in the sense that they might give you a clinical vignette and uh, ask you certain evidence-based practices, or they might occasionally throw in a few physiology questions. So our question that we'll be doing today will be a mixture of evidence-based bedside practices along with certain physiology-based concepts. So most of these are quite straightforward, but by and large, you will be tested on these concepts only. So it is exclusively an MCQ-based class. I'll give you a question. Please unmute yourself and answer. There are no wrong answers. And most of these are questions which I'm sure you guys will be able to answer. And then we will dwell on the explanations for a little bit. And that should cover your domain by and large. This is going to be a 45 to 50-minute class tops. Okay. So firstly, let us revise all the points that we did in the last class. So we spoke about acute respiratory acidosis and how that causes a sharp fall in pH with a minimal bicarbonate rise. Why? Because the body has less time to adapt, versus a chronic respiratory acidosis where the pH becomes closer to normal because the bicarb rises, because the body has time to basically retain bicarbonate, and an acute on chronic, which it falls somewhere between these two pictures. Then we spoke about type 1 respiratory failure, the definition, how it is defined as a low PaO2 with a normal or low PCO2. We spoke about the most common mechanism of hypoxemic respiratory failure, that being VQ mismatch. We spoke about alveolar ventilation, about the causes behind it, how it can be due to reduced respiratory drive, and how it causes type 2 respiratory failure. We spoke about NIV being the first line for COPD, and how if there is a carbon dioxide retention, what are our steps. So increasing IPAP obviously improves ventilation, and that should be our first step whenever there is a carbon dioxide retention on COPD, while EPAP mainly focuses on the oxygenation. We spoke about early prolonged prone positioning, how it provides a mortality benefit and is now grade 1 recommendation for moderate to severe ARDS. Pulmonary embolism with shock, the echocardiographic signs, RV dilatation with septal flattening. We spoke about this. We spoke about hyperoxia and how it is important to titrate oxygen therapy and aim for adequate rather than supranormal oxygenation. We spoke about oxygen-induced hypercapnia, VQ mismatch, and the Haldane effect, how this is important, and the concept of hypoxic drive, how that is not the most important mechanism when it comes to oxygen-induced carbon dioxide retention. We spoke about how in salicylate poisoning, a rising PCO2 basically indicates clinical deterioration, and it shows that the patient is developing a respiratory fatigue. CPAP remains the first line for oxygenation and for reduction of work of breathing in patients with cardiogenic pulmonary edema. High flow nasal oxygen is first line for stable hypoxemic respiratory failure in patients who are not responding to standard oxygen therapy. And neuromuscular respiratory failure, if there is a rising PCO2, that is an ominous late sign. That means we must do something urgently and ventilate the patient. Okay, so these are all the take-home points from the previous lecture. So starting off with the fresh round of MCQs, here we have a mechanically ventilated patient with ARDS. The patient is having worsening hypoxia. These are the settings, very basic settings of tidal volume of 6 ml per kg of predicted body weight. Your FiO2 is quite high. FiO2 is 0.8 and PEEP is 8, right? So you've measured the plateau pressure, which comes out to be 26. So hemodynamics are stable. Now, which of these is the most appropriate next step to improve oxygenation while remaining consistent with lung protective principles? So anyone, what would be your next step? Guys, come on, this is very basic. This is what you do at the bedside. What would you do next for this patient? Would you increase the tidal volume to 10 ml per kg?
Increase the PEEP.
Yeah, very good. Very simple. A very simple question. So increase the PEEP cautiously and reassess the response, right? These are full toss critical questions. So no discrepancies here. So next step here obviously is to increase the PEEP, right? So basically you check for, there's a concept called PEEP responsiveness. So this patient has a severe ARDS, and despite a high FiO2, the patient remains hypoxemic. So tidal volume is already lung protective. So you can't increase the tidal volume anymore. 10 ml per kg, 12 ml per kg is not going to help the patient, right? We already know that. Plateau pressure remains acceptable. So the next step would obviously be to increase the PEEP, right? There are many ways by which you can titrate the PEEP, by which you can set the ideal PEEP. That is beyond the domain of this lecture. But basically, the next step here is to obviously increase PEEP and check for the response. If the patient improves with a higher PEEP, then you increase the PEEP, right? So oxygenation should be improved, obviously, in ARDS, but your lung protective ventilation should still be ongoing, right? So that is the take-home message. If your plateau pressure is acceptable, please try to increase the PEEP as long as your plateau pressure remains within what was the acceptable plateau pressure range that we spoke about in the last class. Your plateau pressure
30.
goal for
30.
yes, 30. Yes, very good. And driving pressure?
15.
Less than 15.
Yes. So when you answer, always try to talk about the units as well, right? So 30 centimeter water versus 15 centimeter water. Okay. So PEEP, how does it help in ARDS? It has a lot of benefits. It will help by preventing end expiratory alveolar collapse, recruit unstable lung units, reducing cyclic atelic trauma, and improving oxygenation. So PEEP in every patient must be individualized. There are problems with giving too much PEEP. We know, right? What all it can cause? It can cause a reduced venous return, over distension of alveoli, and worsening hemodynamics. So the response should be monitored. Okay. Next question. Let us try to get through these MCQs as fast as we can, right? Because these are all very simple questions. So here you have a patient who's admitted with hypoxemic respiratory failure. This is the ABG, right? pH of ABG on room air. pH 7.45, PCO2 32, PaO2 of 50. Now, alveolar arterial oxygen gradient, right? Which is the most likely interpretation of this patient's alveolar arterial oxygen gradient without any kind of complicated calculations. Tell me, what do you think it would be? Would it be increased? Would it be normal? Would it be decreased? Or would it be uninterpretable? Very simple. What is the arterial PO2 in this patient?
50.
50. And what would be the A gradient in this case?
Would be.
Okay, can anyone tell me how you calculate the A gradient? Just roughly. Okay. So in this case, obviously A gradient is increased, right? So how does the A gradient help? It helps in distinguishing different causes of hypoxemia, right? So what is the A gradient? Basically, you look at the alveolar minus the arterial oxygen concentration. So your arterial oxygen concentration would be derived from the blood gas. So in this case, it was 50. Now the alveolar oxygen concentration is calculated from this formula. I would suggest you know this formula for the exam. They might ask you something basic like, does this patient have a raised A gradient, a low A gradient? So it's important for you to know this formula. Very simple. See, your alveolar O2 is FiO2 multiplied by barometric pressure minus pressure of water vapor. So what is the barometric pressure at sea level? Basic physics. It is 760, right? We learned this in class 4 or 5. 760 mm at sea level. And your partial pressure of water is 47. So this becomes 760 minus 47. So you multiply that by the FiO2. And from that, you have to subtract the PaCO2 divided by 0.8. Okay, so that's it. So in this case, what would be your FiO2? This patient was what? On room air, right? So FiO2 would be 0.21. So you multiply that by barometric minus water vapor pressure. And from that, you subtract PaCO2 divided by 0.8. This patient will have a high AA gradient. Okay, he will definitely have a high AA gradient. So if you calculate this for this patient, it will come to around 100, which is high. Okay, so why is the A gradient important? Like, obviously we don't calculate it always at the bedside, but ideally we should, because it would help us differentiate between the different causes of hypoxemia. So if your A gradient is high, your causes could be VQ mismatch, shunt, or a problem in diffusion. However, if your A gradient is normal, right, then you must always think of two causes, either a hypoventilation or a low FiO2. Okay, so normal AA gradient is roughly 10 to 15. Okay, so if your AA gradient is normal in a patient who is hypoxemic, these are the two causes. So in type 1 respiratory failure, by and large, the A gradient is increased unless it is because of these two causes. So algorithm is very important. So hypoxemia, the next thing you do, you calculate the A gradient, which we don't do, right? So if it is widened, then these could be the causes. So you could have a VQ mismatch, a shunt, or a diffusion limitation. I spoke about the different physiological causes of all of these. What is important here is that shunt doesn't respond to oxygen, but VQ mismatch does, right? So if you have a widened gradient and then you have a response to oxygen, that is, you're increasing the FiO2 and your patient's oxygenation is improving, this is most likely to be a VQ mismatch. But if your response to oxygenation is poor, then it is more likely to be a shunt. Okay, so that's how that goes in favor of a wider gradient. How you basically look at a high A gradient. Now, if your A gradient happens to be normal, then you have two causes: either a hypoventilation or a low FiO2. Okay, so that's how you differentiate hypoxemia depending on the A gradient. Very, very important concept. I expect this concept to be clear to all intensivists. Okay, it's very important. Is this clear? You might be given a question on A gradient. You might be asked to interpret the A gradient. You might be given a patient with a low A gradient, right? And you have to find out what the cause is. So typically hypoventilation or low FiO2. Is this clear to everyone? Okay, then I'm moving on. I'm assuming it's clear. This concept is clear. Remember, this is important for both your part 1 and part 2 exam. Okay. Whenever, even in the part 2, if you're given an ABG, you are at least, when you're diagnosing the ABG, you're at least expected to utter that this patient has a high A gradient, which most of us do not do. Okay, so that is an extra point. That will carry an extra point. And you might also be tested in your part 1.